Jake Morrison wiped the sweat from his forehead as he guided his horse through the dusty streets of Copper Creek. The small mining town buzzed with activity, but Jake felt like an outsider looking in. He had been drifting from place to place for 3 years now, ever since the war ended and he came home to find his family's ranch sold for unpaid taxes. The sun beat down mercilessly on the wooden buildings that lined Main Street. Jake's horse, a sturdy chestnut mare named Belle, snorted and shook her head, eager for water and shade. Jake patted her neck gently. "Easy, girl. We'll find a place to rest soon." As they approached the town's only saloon, Jake noticed a crowd gathered near the general store. Raised voices carried across the dusty street, and Jake could see someone in the center of the commotion. His instincts told him to keep riding, but something made him pause. "You don't belong here," a harsh voice shouted. "Take your kind and get out of our town." Jake dismounted and tied Belle to the hitching post. He had seen enough hatred during the war to recognize it when he heard it. Moving closer, he could see the crowd more clearly. About 20 men stood in a rough circle around someone Jake couldn't see yet. "My money is as good as anyone else's," came a clear, steady voice from the center of the circle. It was a woman's voice, calm despite the obvious tension. Jake pushed through the outer edge of the crowd and saw her. She stood straight and proud, a woman of perhaps 25 years with long black hair braided down her back. Her dress was simple but clean, and she held a small bundle of supplies in her arms. What struck Jake most was her eyes, dark and fearless, meeting the hostile stares around her without flinching. "Not in this town," snarled Tom Bradley, the largest man in the circle. Jake recognized him from the saloon earlier. Bradley owned the biggest mine in the area and seemed to think that gave him the right to run everyone else's business. "We don't serve Indians here." The woman lifted her chin slightly. "I am Maria Santos. My husband was Mexican, not Indian. But even if I were, I have done nothing wrong." "Your kind brings nothing but trouble," Bradley continued, stepping closer. "First it's buying supplies, next thing you know there's a whole village of you people camping on our land." Jake felt his jaw tighten. He had met plenty of Mexicans during his time in the army, good men who fought and died alongside him. The hatred in Bradley's voice reminded him of everything ugly he had hoped to leave behind. "The law says I can trade here," Maria replied evenly. "I need supplies for my children." "What law?" Bradley laughed, and several men in the crowd joined in. "Judge Morrison ain't here, and Sheriff Williams sees things our way. Your money ain't welcome." At the mention of Judge Morrison, Jake's hand instinctively moved to his gun belt. Morrison had been his father's name, though Jake had never known of any judge in the family. Still, hearing his surname in this context made him pay closer attention. "Please," Maria said, and Jake heard the first hint of desperation in her voice. "My children need food. I can pay." "Then take them somewhere else," Bradley said, reaching out to grab Maria's arm. "We don't want your—" "Take your hand off the lady." Jake's voice cut through the crowd's murmur like a knife. Every head turned toward him, including Maria's. For a moment, her composed mask slipped, and Jake saw surprise in her dark eyes. Bradley's hand dropped from Maria's arm, but his face darkened. "This ain't your business, stranger." Jake stepped forward, his spurs jingling softly against the wooden boardwalk. "I'm making it my business." The crowd shifted nervously. Jake was tall and lean, with the kind of weathered look that came from years of hard living. More importantly, he wore his gun like a man who knew how to use it. "You picking a fight over some Mexican woman?" Bradley asked, his voice rising. "You don't even know her." "Don't need to," Jake replied calmly. "I know bullying when I see it." Maria stepped slightly to one side, giving Jake a clear view of Bradley. Her eyes moved between the two men, calculating and cautious. "Walk away, cowboy," Bradley warned. This town's got its ways, and we don't need some drifter telling us how to handle our business. Seems to me the lady just wants to buy supplies and go home to her children, Jake said. Nothing wrong with that. There's plenty wrong with it, another voice called from the crowd. We got enough problems without encouraging more of them to come around. Jake's eyes swept the faces around him. Some looked angry, others uncertain. A few seemed almost ashamed, but unwilling to speak up against the majority. Mr. Morrison? Maria spoke his name quietly, and Jake realized she had heard Bradley mention it earlier. Jake nodded slightly. Jake Morrison, ma'am. I am grateful for your words, but these men are right about one thing. This is not your fight. Maybe not, Jake agreed, but I'm in it now. Bradley took a step forward. You sure you want to make enemies on your first day in town, Morrison? Jake's hand rested casually on his gun handle. I'm sure I don't want to watch 20 men intimidate one woman. The tension in the circle grew thicker. Jake could see Bradley weighing his options. The man was big and probably tough, but Jake had the look of someone who had seen real violence and survived it. This ain't over, Bradley finally said, pointing a thick finger at Maria. You're not welcome here, and neither is anyone who helps you. Message received, Jake said evenly. Bradley glared at him for a long moment, then jerked his head toward the crowd. Come on, boys, let's get a drink. Most of the men followed Bradley toward the saloon, though several cast dark looks back at Jake and Maria. Within a few minutes, the street had emptied except for the two of them and a handful of curious onlookers watching from doorways. Maria turned to face Jake fully. Thank you, Mr. Morrison. That was kind, but it may have cost you more than you know. Jake shrugged. Wouldn't be the first time I made enemies standing up for what's right. Still, you did not have to help me. Yes, I did. Jake looked toward the general store. You still need those supplies? Maria nodded. Yes. But I do not think Mr. Henderson will sell to me now. Let's find out. Jake gestured toward the store. After you, ma'am. They walked to the general store together, their footsteps echoing on the wooden boardwalk. Jake noticed how straight Maria held herself, showing no sign of the fear she must have felt surrounded by that angry crowd. The store owner, a thin man with graying hair, looked nervous as they approached. I'm not sure I can help you folks right now. Why not? Jake asked mildly. Well, you see, Mr. Bradley and the others, they do a lot of business here, and this lady wants to buy supplies with real money, Jake interrupted. Seems like good business to me. Henderson wrung his hands. It's complicated, you understand. This is a small town and... Not that complicated, Jake said, moving closer to the counter. She wants to buy goods. You want to sell goods. What's the problem? Maria placed her hand gently on Jake's arm. Please, Mr. Morrison, I do not wish to cause trouble for Mr. Henderson. Jake felt the warmth of her touch through his shirt sleeve. Ma'am, some trouble is worth causing. Henderson looked between them, clearly torn. Finally, he sighed. What do you need? Maria quickly listed her supplies. Flour, beans, salt, coffee, and a few other basics. Henderson gathered the items with shaking hands, constantly glancing toward the window as if expecting Bradley to return. That'll be $4.30, Henderson said quietly. Maria counted out the exact amount and placed it on the counter. Henderson scooped up the money quickly and wrapped her purchases in brown paper. Thank you, Maria said. Henderson nodded but wouldn't meet her eyes. You folks might want to... Well, you might want to finish your business quickly. Jake helped Maria carry her packages outside. As they walked toward where Belle waited, Maria spoke quietly. You have made powerful enemies today, Mr. Morrison. Tom Bradley owns half this town and influences the other half. What about you? Jake asked. Where do you live that you need to come here for supplies? Maria pointed toward the mountains visible in the distance. About 10 miles north, in a small valley, there is a creek and good grazing for our animals. Our animals? My children and I have a few goats and chickens. We try to be self-sufficient, but some things we must buy. Jake loaded her packages into his saddlebags. How do you usually get home? I walk, Maria said simply. It is not far. Jake looked at the sun, already beginning its afternoon descent toward the western mountains. It'll be dark before you get home. Why don't I ride along with you? Make sure you get there safely. Maria studied his face carefully. Why would you do this? You do not know me. Maybe that's exactly why I should, Jake replied. Sometimes you learn the most about a place by seeing who its people are willing to help and who they're willing to hurt. And what have you learned about Copper Creek today? Jake mounted Belle and extended his hand to help Maria up behind him. That it's got at least one person worth defending and about 20 who aren't. Maria hesitated for a moment, then accepted his hand and swung up behind him. You may feel differently when you know more. Try me, Jake said, nudging Belle forward. As they rode out of town, Jake was acutely aware of Maria's presence behind him. She sat carefully, not holding on until they reached rougher ground outside town. Even then, her touch was light and respectful. Tell me about your children, Jake said as they followed a well-worn path toward the mountains. Luis is 8. Elena is 6, Maria replied. They are good children, but they ask many questions about why some people treat us differently. Hard questions for children that age. Hard questions for any age, Maria said softly. Their father died 2 years ago in a mining accident. Since then, it has been difficult. Jake felt a familiar tightness in his chest. He knew what it was like to lose family, to face the world alone. I'm sorry for your loss. Thank you. Carlos was a good man. He came to this country with nothing and worked hard to build a life for us. They rode in comfortable silence for a while. The only sounds the rhythmic clip-clop of Belle's hooves and the distant cry of a hawk circling overhead. The landscape gradually changed from the dusty flatlands around Copper Creek to rolling hills dotted with scrub oak and pine. There, Maria said, pointing to a narrow gap between 2 hills. Through there. Jake guided Belle through the gap and found himself looking down into a small, hidden valley. A clear stream ran through the middle, and Jake could see a modest adobe house surrounded by a vegetable garden. A few goats grazed nearby, and chickens pecked at the ground near a small coop. It's beautiful, Jake said, and he meant it. The valley felt peaceful and protected, a world away from the hostility of Copper Creek. Carlos chose this place, Maria said proudly. He said it would keep us safe. As they rode down into the valley, 2 children emerged from the house. The boy, Luis, stood protectively in front of his younger sister Elena, both watching Jake with curious but cautious eyes. Jake dismounted first, then helped Maria down. She immediately went to her children, speaking quickly in Spanish. Jake caught enough to understand she was telling them about what happened in town and explaining who Jake was. Luis stepped forward and extended his hand formally. Thank you for helping our mother, senor. Jake shook the boy's hand solemnly. You're welcome, son. Elena peeked out from behind her mother's skirt, her dark eyes wide with curiosity. She was a beautiful child, with her mother's features and an air of quiet intelligence. Are you staying for dinner? Luis asked. Mama always makes extra, and Papa used to say a guest at dinner brings good luck. Jake looked at Maria questioningly. She nodded slightly. You are welcome to stay, Mr. Morrison. It is the least I can do after your kindness today. I'd be honored, Jake replied. As Maria began preparing dinner, Jake helped Luis tend to the animals. The boy chattered constantly, asking questions about Jake's horse, his gun, and where he had come from. Elena gradually warmed up too, eventually showing Jake her collection of pretty stones she had found by the creek. During dinner, Jake learned more about the family's situation. Carlos had worked in the mines around Copper Creek, saving every penny he could. He had bought this land legitimately with papers and everything, but many people in town seemed to think that didn't matter. After Carlos died, Maria explained as they ate, things became harder. Some people think we should leave, sell the land, and go back to Mexico. But this is our home now. The children were born here. You have every right to stay, Jake said firmly. Rights on paper are different from rights in practice, Maria replied quietly. You saw that today. After dinner, as the sun set behind the mountains, Jake prepared to leave. Maria walked with him to where Belle waited, saddled and ready for the ride back to town. Thank you again, Mr. Morrison. Today could have been much worse without your help. Just Jake, please. And you don't need to thank me. Maria smiled, the first truly relaxed expression he had seen from her all day. Jake, then, but I do need to thank you. Kindness is rare enough that it should be acknowledged. Jake swung up into the saddle. Will you be going back to town soon? I must. We will need more supplies eventually. When you do, send Luis to find me first. I'll go with you. Maria looked up at him in the gathering twilight. You cannot fight the whole town, Jake. Maybe not, Jake agreed. But I can make sure they know someone's watching. As Jake rode back toward Copper Creek, he found himself thinking about Maria's words. She was right. He couldn't fight the whole town. But there was something about her quiet dignity and fierce love for her children that had awakened something in him he thought was long dead. For the first time in 3 years, Jake Morrison felt like he had found something worth fighting for. The lights of Copper Creek twinkled in the distance as Jake rode through the darkness, unaware that Tom Bradley and several of his men were already making plans to deal with the troublesome stranger who had interfered with their business that afternoon. Jake woke to the sound of pounding on his hotel room door. The gray light of dawn filtered through the thin curtains, and he could hear angry voices in the hallway outside. He rolled out of bed, grabbed his gun belt, and moved to the window. Below in the street, he could see Tom Bradley and at least a dozen men gathered near the hotel entrance. Some carried rifles, others had their hands resting on their pistols. Jake recognized several faces from the crowd that had surrounded Maria the day before. Morrison! Bradley's voice boomed from downstairs. Get out here and face what's coming to you. Jake strapped on his gun belt and pulled on his boots. He had expected this confrontation, but not quite so soon or with so many men. Through the thin walls, he could hear other hotel guests stirring, muttering complaints about the noise. When Jake emerged from the hotel, the crowd fell silent. Bradley stood in the center, his face red with anger and whatever he had been drinking since the saloons opened. You made a mistake yesterday, Morrison, Bradley said, his words slightly slurred. Thought maybe you'd learned your lesson and moved on by now. Still here, Jake replied calmly, scanning the faces around him. Some of these men looked uncomfortable, like they weren't entirely sure why they were there. Others, though, had the hard look of men who enjoyed violence. That Mexican woman ain't worth dying for, Bradley continued. Last chance to ride out of town peacefully. Jake stepped down from the hotel's wooden porch, his spurs ringing against the steps. And if I don't, Bradley's hand moved toward his gun, then we'll settle this right here, right now. Tom Bradley! The sharp voice came from across the street. Everyone turned to see an elderly man approaching, wearing a badge and moving with the careful dignity of someone who had been keeping the peace for many years. Sheriff Williams was older than Jake had expected, probably past 60, with gray hair and kind eyes that were currently filled with stern disapproval. What's all this racket about? Williams demanded, though his tone suggested he already knew. Just having a conversation with Mr. Morrison here, Bradley replied, though he moved his hand away from his gun, trying to help him understand how things work in our town. Williams looked from Bradley to Jake, then at the armed men spread around the street. Looks more like a lynching party to me. You boys put those weapons away and get about your business. Now wait just a minute, Sheriff, one of Bradley's men protested. This stranger came in here yesterday making trouble, interfering with— I know what happened yesterday, Williams interrupted. I also know that Mrs. Santos has every legal right to trade in this town, and Mr. Morrison here broke no laws helping her do it. Bradley's face grew even redder. Legal rights don't mean nothing if it causes problems for the rest of us honest citizens. Tom, you've been drinking, and you're talking foolish, Williams said firmly. Take your boys and go home. Sleep it off. This ain't over, Morrison, Bradley snarled, but he was already backing down. The presence of the sheriff had clearly changed his plans. As the crowd began to disperse, Williams approached Jake. Walk with me, son. They moved away from the hotel, their boots echoing on the wooden sidewalk. Williams waited until they were out of earshot before speaking. You've stirred up quite a hornet's nest, the sheriff observed. Wasn't my intention, Jake replied honestly. Maybe not, but that's what happened. Williams stopped and turned to face him. Tom Bradley's not entirely wrong about one thing. Maria Santos has had trouble here before. Some people think she'd be better off somewhere else. Jake felt a flash of anger. And what do you think, Sheriff? Williams was quiet for a moment, studying Jake's face. I think she's got as much right to be here as anyone. Her husband worked hard, paid his debts, and died honest. But thinking something and being able to protect it are two different things. Are you telling me to leave town? I'm telling you to be careful, Williams replied. Bradley's got influence, and he's not used to being crossed. If you're planning to stay around here, you'd better be sure you can handle what comes next. Jake looked back toward the hotel, where a few of Bradley's men still lingered. What happens to Maria and her children if everyone just walks away? That's been the question for 2 years now, Williams said sadly, and I'm afraid I don't have a good answer. Later that morning, Jake rode out to Maria's valley. He found her working in her vegetable garden while Luis helped repair a section of fence that kept the goats contained. Elena sat nearby, carefully sorting beans her mother had picked. Jake, Luis called out when he spotted the approaching rider. Mama, Jake is here! Maria straightened from her work, shading her eyes against the sun. Jake could see the question in her expression as he dismounted. Everything all right? She asked. Had some visitors this morning? Jake replied, then told her about Bradley's early morning confrontation and the sheriff's intervention. Maria's face grew troubled. I was afraid of this. When you helped me yesterday, I hoped maybe things would be different, but this is exactly what I expected. What do you mean? It is always the same pattern, Maria said, removing her garden gloves. Someone shows kindness, and then Bradley makes sure they pay a price for it. Eventually, people learn it is easier to look the other way. Elena looked up from her bean sorting. Are the bad men coming here, Mama? Maria knelt beside her daughter. No, mija, we are safe here in our valley. But Jake could hear the uncertainty in her voice, and he was sure Elena could too. The little girl nodded, but her eyes remained worried. Luis, Jake called to the boy. Want to help me with something? The boy eagerly abandoned his fence repair and ran over. Jake showed him how to properly care for Belle's tack, explaining the importance of keeping leather clean and oiled. While they worked, Jake found himself watching Maria as she continued her garden work. She moved with efficient grace, each motion purposeful and economical. There was something deeply peaceful about watching her tend to the plants that would feed her family. Jake realized he hadn't felt this kind of contentment in years. Jake, Luis said, interrupting his thoughts, were you really a soldier? Yes, I was. Why do you ask? You carry your gun like Papa said soldiers do, and Mama says you were not afraid of all those men yesterday. Jake glanced at Maria, who had paused in her work to listen. Being brave doesn't mean you're not afraid, Luis. It means you do what's right, even when you are afraid. Were you afraid yesterday? Jake considered the question seriously. A little, not of fighting, but of what might happen to your mother if I didn't help. Luis nodded solemnly, as if this made perfect sense to him. That afternoon, Jake helped Maria with various chores around the small ranch. He fixed a loose board on the chicken coop, helped her move a heavy water barrel, and showed Elena how to braid rope from some old hemp they found in the barn. As they worked together, Maria told him more about her life with Carlos and their dreams for the future. They had planned to expand their small ranch, maybe buy more land and raise cattle. Carlos had been saving money for that dream when he died. The mine accident, she explained as they sat by the creek watching the children play. There was a cave-in. Carlos and 2 other men were trapped. By the time they dug them out, she didn't finish the sentence, but Jake understood. He had seen enough death to recognize the particular pain that came from losing someone suddenly before you had a chance to say goodbye. The other 2 men who died, Jake asked gently, were they Mexican too? Maria shook her head. One was Irish, one was from Germany. The mine owners paid their families compensation. They said Carlos was careless, that he caused the accident. They paid me nothing. Jake felt his anger rising again. Did you have proof otherwise? The other miners knew the truth. They said the support beams were rotten, that the owners knew it was dangerous. But when it came time to testify, Maria shrugged. They had families to feed, jobs to keep. So you've been surviving on what Carlos saved? And what I can make selling eggs and vegetables in town. Or could until yesterday. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the sun lower toward the western mountains. Jake found himself wondering what it would be like to stay here, to be part of this peaceful life Maria had built. Jake, Maria said quietly, why are you really here? Not just today, but in Copper Creek at all? Jake was quiet for a long moment. I've been drifting since the war ended. Looking for something, I guess, though I wasn't sure what. And have you found it? Jake looked at her, then at Luis and Elena playing by the water's edge. Maybe. That evening, as Jake prepared to leave again, Maria walked with him to where Belle waited. Will you come back tomorrow? She asked. Do you want me to? Maria smiled. The children enjoy having you here. And so do I. Jake felt something warm settle in his chest. Then I'll be back. As he rode toward town in the gathering darkness, Jake's mind was full of plans. He was tired of drifting, tired of having nothing to fight for. Maria and her children deserved better than living in fear of men like Tom Bradley. But when Jake reached Copper Creek, he discovered that Bradley had not been idle during the day. The hotel clerk, a nervous young man named Peterson, met him at the door with obvious reluctance. I'm real sorry, Mr. Morrison, but I can't let you have a room tonight. Why not? Jake asked, though he suspected he already knew. Mr. Bradley came by this afternoon. He suggested it might be bad for business to keep renting to you. Jake sighed. Any other hotels in town? Peterson shook his head. Just the boarding house, but Mrs. Crawford got the same message. Jake stood in the hotel lobby considering his options. He could camp outside town, but that would make it harder to keep an eye on things. He could confront Bradley directly, but that would likely lead to the gunfight the man seemed to want. Mr. Morrison? Jake turned to see Sheriff Williams approaching from the street. The older man looked tired and worried. Having trouble finding a place to sleep? Williams asked. Seems that way. Williams was quiet for a moment, then nodded toward the door. Come with me. The sheriff led Jake to a small house behind the jail. It was simple but clean, with a bed, a table, and a wood stove. "This is where I stay when I need to be close to the jail," Williams explained. "You can use it tonight, but Jake, tomorrow you need to make a decision." "What kind of decision?" "Whether you're planning to stay and fight or whether you're moving on. Because if you stay, this thing with Bradley is only going to get worse." Jake sat down on the edge of the bed. "What would you do, Sheriff?" Williams leaned against the door frame. 20 years ago? I'd probably have shot Bradley already and let the judge sort it out. But I'm older now, and I've seen what violence does to a community. And Maria? What happens to her if everyone just walks away?" "That's the question that keeps me up at night," Williams admitted. "She's a good woman, and those children deserve better. But I'm one old man with a badge, and Bradley's got money and influence." After Williams left, Jake lay on the narrow bed staring at the ceiling. Tomorrow he would have to make the choice Williams had mentioned. He could ride out of Copper Creek and continue his aimless drifting, or he could stay and face whatever Tom Bradley had planned. But as he thought about Maria's quiet strength and her children's trusting faces, Jake realized the choice had already been made. For the first time since the war, he had found something worth fighting for. The next morning, Jake was awakened by the sound of rapid hoofbeats in the street outside. He grabbed his gun and looked out the window to see Luis riding bareback on one of their goat's companion horses, his face streaked with tears. Jake was dressed and outside before the boy had even dismounted. "Luis, what's wrong?" "Jake!" the boy sobbed, throwing himself into Jake's arms. "They came to our valley. They hurt Mama and took Elena." Jake felt ice form in his veins. "Who? Who took them?" "Mr. Bradley and his men," Luis gasped between sobs. "They said Mama had to learn her lesson. They said she had until sunset to leave our home forever, or they would make sure Elena never came back." Behind them, Sheriff Williams emerged from the jail, his face grim. He had heard enough to understand what had happened. "Tom Bradley has gone too far this time," Williams said quietly. Jake looked at the sheriff, then at the sobbing boy in his arms. The time for half measures and careful diplomacy had passed. "Sheriff," Jake said, his voice deadly calm, "I'm going to need you to deputize me." Williams met his eyes and nodded slowly. "Raise your right hand, son." Deputy Jake Morrison rode hard toward Maria's Valley, with Sheriff Williams beside him and young Luis clinging to his back. The boy had insisted on coming despite Jake's protests, arguing that he knew hiding places in the valley that the men might not find. "They were waiting when Mama came back from feeding the chickens," Luis explained as they rode. "Mr. Bradley said this was what happened to people who didn't listen to warnings." Jake's jaw clenched tighter with every word. Taking a child was crossing a line that no decent man would cross. Whatever happened next, Bradley had brought it on himself. As they approached the gap leading into Maria's Valley, Jake held up his hand for them to stop. In the distance, they could see smoke rising from the direction of Maria's house. "Stay here with Luis," Jake told the sheriff. "I'm going to scout ahead." "Jake, you can't go in there alone," Williams protested. "Bradley's got at least 6 men with him." "Then we'll even the odds." Jake dismounted and handed Bell's reins to Luis. "Can you get us above the valley without being seen?" Luis nodded eagerly. "There is a trail Papa showed me. We can see the whole valley from up there." They left the horses hidden in a grove of trees and followed Luis up a steep, rocky path. The boy moved like a mountain goat, sure-footed and silent. After 20 minutes of climbing, they reached a ledge that overlooked the entire valley. Jake felt his anger turn cold and deadly at what he saw below. Maria's house had been partially burned. The roof was gone, and black smoke still rose from the ruins. The vegetable garden had been trampled, and the chicken coop was destroyed. But what made Jake's blood run cold was the sight of Maria herself. She was tied to a post near what remained of her front porch, her dress torn and her face showing signs of rough handling. Even from a distance, Jake could see her struggling against her bonds. "Where's Elena?" Williams whispered. Luis pointed toward the barn. They must have her in there. That is where Papa used to keep the tools. Jake could see 3 men standing guard around the property, while Bradley and 2 others were near Maria. The men looked relaxed, confident that they had everything under control. Here's what we're going to do, Jake said quietly. Sheriff, you work your way around to the left side of the valley. Give me 15 minutes, then start making noise. Draw their attention. What about you? I'm going straight down to the barn to get Elena. Luis, you stay here where it's safe. No! The boy protested. I can help. Jake put his hands on Luis's shoulders. You can help by staying alive and safe. Your mama and sister need you. Reluctantly, Luis nodded. Jake worked his way down the steep slope toward the barn. Moving from rock to rock and bush to bush, his years as a soldier had taught him how to move quietly when lives depended on it. The barn sat about 100 yards from the main house. Jake could see one guard lounging in the shade nearby, but the man was watching the house rather than looking for threats from the mountainside. When Jake reached the back of the barn, he could hear Elena's voice through the wooden walls. She was singing softly to herself, a Spanish lullaby Maria had probably taught her. The sound of the frightened little girl trying to comfort herself made Jake's resolve even harder. Jake slipped around to the side of the barn and peered through a gap in the boards. Elena sat on a pile of hay, her hands tied but otherwise unharmed. The guard was outside, which meant Jake had a clear path to her. He waited until he heard Sheriff Williams begin shouting from the other side of the valley, creating a distraction as planned. As the guard ran toward the house to see what was happening, Jake slipped into the barn. Elena, he whispered, don't be afraid. I'm here to take you home. The little girl's face lit up with relief and joy. Jake, I knew you would come. Jake quickly cut her bonds with his knife. Are you hurt? Elena shook her head. The bad men said they would hurt Mama if I made noise. Is she all right? She's going to be fine, Jake promised, though he wasn't entirely sure that was true yet. I need you to do exactly what I say, okay? Elena nodded solemnly. Jake peered out of the barn. The distraction had worked. All the guards were moving toward where Williams was making noise on the far side of the valley. Jake could see Bradley still standing near Maria, but his attention was focused on the commotion. We're going to run to those rocks, Jake whispered, pointing to a pile of boulders about 50 yards away. Stay close to me and don't make a sound. They slipped out of the barn and ran for cover. Elena's small legs pumped as fast as they could, and Jake had to admire her courage. Most children would have been too frightened to think clearly. But Elena was focused and brave. From their hiding place in the rocks, Jake could see the situation more clearly. Bradley had apparently figured out that Williams was creating a distraction and had sent most of his men to investigate. That left only Bradley himself and one other man guarding Maria. Elena, I want you to climb up to that ledge where Luis is waiting, Jake said, pointing up the mountainside. Can you do that? What about Mama? I'm going to get her right now, but first I need to know you're safe. Elena looked torn, but she nodded and began climbing toward where her brother waited. Jake checked his gun and moved toward the house. Bradley was standing with his back to Jake's position, talking angrily to Maria. This is all your fault, Bradley was saying. If you'd just listened to reason, none of this would have happened. Maria's voice was steady despite her circumstances. Taking a child makes you no better than an animal, Tom Bradley. That child's safe as long as you do what you're told, Bradley replied. Sign over the deed to this land, pack up what you can carry, and be gone by morning. Do that, and you'll see your daughter again. And if I refuse? Bradley's companion, a thin man with cold eyes, spoke up. Then accidents happen. Mines cave in, houses catch fire, little girls fall off cliffs. Jake had heard enough. He stepped out from behind the rocks with his gun drawn. Let her go, Bradley. Bradley spun around, his hand moving toward his gun. Morrison, how did you... Doesn't matter how, Jake replied calmly. What matters is that you've kidnapped a child and threatened an innocent woman. That ends now. You're outnumbered, Morrison. My boys will be back any minute. Your boys are chasing shadows in the hills, Jake said. Right now, it's just you, me, and your friend there. The thin man was already reaching for his gun when Jake shot him. The man fell backward, clutching his shoulder and crying out in pain. Bradley drew his own weapon, but Jake was faster. His second shot took Bradley in the gun arm, spinning the bigger man around and sending his pistol flying. It's over, Jake said, moving toward Maria to cut her bonds. But as Jake knelt to free Maria, Bradley pulled a hidden knife from his boot and lunged forward. Maria screamed a warning, but Bradley was already too close. The knife blade caught Jake in the side, slicing through his shirt and drawing blood. Jake rolled away from the attack and came up facing Bradley, who was advancing with the bloody knife raised. Should have minded your own business, Morrison, Bradley snarled. Jake feinted left, then grabbed Bradley's knife hand as the man tried to stab him again. They struggled for control of the weapon, rolling in the dirt near Maria's burned house. Bradley was bigger and stronger, but Jake was younger and had learned to fight dirty during the war. He drove his knee into Bradley's stomach, then twisted the man's wrist until he dropped the knife. Before Bradley could recover, Jake's fist connected with his jaw, sending him sprawling unconscious in the dust. Jake quickly cut Maria free, his hands shaking slightly from exhaustion and the pain in his side. Elena? Maria asked immediately. Safe. She's with Luis up on the ridge. Maria threw her arms around Jake, holding him tightly. I was so afraid they would kill you. Jake winced as her embrace pressed against his wounded side, but he didn't pull away. Are you hurt? Bruises, nothing more, Maria replied. But you are bleeding. Jake looked down at his side where Bradley's knife had cut him. It wasn't deep, but it was bleeding steadily. I'll live. Sheriff Williams appeared with Bradley's other men in custody. The distraction had worked perfectly, and the older lawman had managed to capture all of them without firing a shot. Is everyone all right? Williams called. We're fine, Jake replied. Bradley's unconscious but alive. His friend there needs a doctor for his shoulder. As Williams secured the unconscious Bradley with rope, Luis and Elena came running down from the mountainside. Elena flew into her mother's arms, both of them crying with relief. Luis hung back slightly, looking at Jake with something like hero worship in his young eyes. You saved them, the boy said simply. Jake knelt down despite the pain in his side. We saved them, Luis. You guided us here, remember? You were brave when it mattered most. Over the next few hours, as Williams took Bradley and his men back to town, Jake helped Maria assess the damage to her home. The house could be rebuilt, the garden replanted, the animals replaced. What mattered was that the family was safe and together. What will happen to Bradley? Maria asked as they sat on the steps of what had been her front porch, watching the children play by the creek. He'll go to prison, Jake replied. Kidnapping, arson, assault. The judge will put him away for a long time. And his men? Most of them will probably just get run out of town. They were followers, not leaders. Maria was quiet for a moment. So it is over? Jake looked at her carefully. The threat is over. Bradley can't hurt you anymore. But Maria, your house is gone. Your crops are destroyed. How will you survive the winter? Maria's face showed the worry she had been trying to hide. I do not know. The money Carlos saved is almost gone, and now I have no way to make more. Jake took a deep breath. What he was about to say would change everything, but he knew it was right. Marry me. Maria stared at him in shock. What? I know it's sudden, and I know we haven't known each other long, but hear me out, Jake said, his words coming faster now. You need someone to help rebuild your home and protect your family. I need a reason to stop drifting. I need something to fight for, something to build. Maria's eyes filled with tears. Jake, you cannot just marry me out of pity or duty. It's not pity, Jake said firmly. It's not duty either. Maria, I've been dead inside since the war ended. I've been going through the motions of living without really being alive. But these past few days, being here with you and the children, I feel like myself again. But we barely know each other. I know you're brave and kind and strong. I know you love your children more than your own life. I know you make me want to be a better man than I've been. Jake took her hand gently. I know that's enough to build a life on. Maria studied his face for a long time. And what do you know about raising children who are not your own blood? I know Luis is already braver and more honest than most grown men I've met. I know Elena has a spirit that can't be broken. I know they both deserve a father who will protect them and teach them and love them. Even though they are Mexican? Jake's voice grew firm. They're Americans, Maria. Born here, raised here, with as much right to this country as anyone, and even if they weren't, it wouldn't matter to me. Maria looked toward the creek where Luis and Elena were playing, then back at Jake. My first husband was a good man, but our marriage was arranged by our families. We learned to love each other over time. And I find myself wondering what it would be like to choose for myself this time. Maria smiled through her tears. Yes, Jake Morrison, I will marry you. Jake felt something settle in his chest, a peace he hadn't known in years. Really? Really. But, Maria held up one finger, we do this properly. We court first. The children need time to understand, and so do we. Jake grinned. Yes, ma'am. How long a courtship are you thinking? Long enough for you to build us a new house? Maria replied with a smile that made Jake's heart skip. And long enough for me to teach you how to make proper tortillas. Luis and Elena came running over, curious about why their mother and Jake were holding hands and smiling at each other. Are you going to be our new papa? Elena asked with the direct honesty that only children possess. Jake looked at Maria, who nodded encouragingly. If you want me to be. Yes, Luis shouted, throwing his arms around Jake. I already told the other boys in town that you were the best fighter in all of Colorado. Elena was more thoughtful. Will you teach me to ride a horse like yours? If your mama says it's all right. And will you tell us stories about when you were a soldier? Some stories, Jake agreed. The ones that won't give you nightmares. That evening, as they sat around a campfire near the ruins of the old house, Jake realized that Tom Bradley had been wrong about one thing. Maria Santos hadn't brought trouble to Copper Creek. She had brought salvation. For 3 years, Jake had been a man without purpose, drifting from place to place with no real reason to care about tomorrow. Now he had a family to protect, a home to build, and a future to plan. He had found his reason to stop running. And as Maria leaned against his shoulder while the children roasted marshmallows over the fire, Jake understood that sometimes salvation came in the form of being needed by people worth protecting. Jake, Luis said sleepily from his place by the fire, when we build the new house, can we make it bigger, so you have your own room? Jake looked at Maria, who blushed slightly. We'll see about that after the wedding, she said. When will the wedding be? Elena asked. When the new house is finished, Maria replied. And when Jake has learned to make tortillas that don't taste like leather. Jake laughed. That might take a while. Then we have time to plan a proper celebration, Maria said. The whole town should see that the Santos family, the Morrison family, belongs here. As the fire burned lower and the children fell asleep in their bedrolls, Jake and Maria sat together under the stars. The valley was peaceful again, and would be safer now that Bradley was in jail and his followers scattered. Do you think we are doing the right thing? Maria asked quietly. Getting married so quickly? Jake was quiet for a moment, listening to the gentle sound of the creek and watching the stars reflect in Maria's dark eyes. I think, he said finally, that sometimes life gives you exactly what you need, exactly when you need it. I needed a family, and you needed someone to help protect yours. But more than that, I think we need each other. Maria smiled and moved closer to his warmth. Carlos used to say that God brings people into our lives for a reason. Maybe he brought you to us because he knew we would all need to save each other. Jake thought about that as he watched over his new family. He had come to Copper Creek as a drifter, with no purpose and nothing to lose. He was leaving as a man with everything to gain. In the distance, the lights of Copper Creek twinkled peacefully. The town would be different now, Jake knew. With Bradley gone and a new family establishing itself, other people might find the courage to stand up for what was right, instead of looking the other way. But for now, Jake Morrison was content to sit under the stars with the woman who would be his wife and the children who would be his own, planning their new life together in a valley where love had finally conquered hate.